Welcome to Almost Here, Round the Corner Future Technology podcasts with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies poised to transform our lives for better or worse are the focus of this podcast. Almost here means these technologies are now here and starting to be used, or just around the corner, from Bitcoin to artificial intelligence, 3D printing, blockchain, virtual reality, and more. Coming to Dallas, Texas, September 14th, 15th, and 16th, 2018, the Blockchain and Future Tech Expo. This is going to be a gigantic conference of over 5,000 people. We're going to be talking about blockchain and its applications. We're going to be talking about quantum computing, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, and several other future technologies that are poised to and actually changing our lives as we speak. Here's why you should attend. As you may know, early adopters are the ones that investigated and profited from things like the gold rush in the 1800s, from the dot-com boom in the 1990s, from the internet boom in 2005, from the smartphone explosion in 2007, from the real estate boom that ended in 2008, and of course, from the Bitcoin boom that started in 2012. Early adopters act now. They don't wait till later. They go out west first. In their covered wagons, they find the biggest gold nuggets. If you consider yourself an early adopter and you want to find the biggest nuggets, then you owe it to yourself to attend this upcoming conference. Blockchain is going to affect how we control and store our medical data, how we send money around the world, how we bank, and more. But artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and cybersecurity will play a pivotal role in our lives as well. And that's why our next event, September 14th to the 16th at the Dallas Convention Center, is going to have not only 5,000 plus attendees, but will showcase blockchain, AI, cybersecurity, quantum computing, and more. You want to get in on the coming gold rush of future tech and opportunity as an early adopter. Don't be left out. To register, go to bftexpo.com. That's blockchainfuturetechexpo.com. Thank you. Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with Future Tech Podcast. I have as my guest Stephen Barrie, Chief Business Development Guy at Viome, V-I-O-M-E. And we did an interview with Naveen from Viome a few weeks back, and he was so interesting and so enthused that I wanted to get back with Viome and talk to them some more. And my guest today has a great track record in this industry, a long, long history. So welcome, Stephen. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Rich. I'm happy to be back here.
Yeah. So, we'll get into your work at Viome in a second, but tell me a little bit about your background. I know you've been pretty influential in this space.
My journey has always been around really how I can help create things that help people make better decisions about their health. How can we provide information that allows them to make the choices that will allow them to improve their health, both short-term wise and also long-term wise. I'm a physician, scientist, New York Times author, best-selling author. So this is kind of what I've done. And about 40 years ago, I became very interested in the microbiome, which we can talk a little bit about what that means, that word, and its relationship to health. And in the past 4 or 5 years, those relationships have now become very crystal clear and very, very important.
And how did you end up working at Viome?
When I retired, I founded Genova Diagnostics, which is a clinical lab that does functional medicine testing around the world. And I retired from that, I guess, actually about 12, 13 years ago. And then the Chinese government invited me to come over and help them implement functional medicine into the Chinese healthcare system. And as part of that, we created the largest private clinical lab in China and about 48 functional medicine clinical centers around China. And I had the distinct pleasure of actually being one of the physicians for President Xi, the president of China, who, by the way, is a very, very smart man.
Well, that's great.
Yeah. So there, I was in China 7 years and began to really miss the United States and my kids and my friends and was thinking about coming back. And I'd been following Viome, of course, because they were doing groundbreaking work in the microbiome field. And I knew their chief medical officer. And when she heard that I was coming back, she said, "Oh, you've got to talk to Naveen Jain, who was on your show a few weeks ago, and let him tell you about Viome." So the funny part of this is I thought, okay, I'm coming back and I'll do some consulting and, be on a scientific advisory board and write some more books and things. And the dean says, no, yeah, you're coming to work full time. And I said, no, I can't come to work full time. He said, yes, you're coming to work full time. So here I am, 7 days a week, 16 hours a day.
Well, that's more than full time. That's crazy.
Yeah, well, we're changing. We're in a fortunate position to be disrupting the healthcare industry and change the world. And this is what I love to do. And this is what our team loves to do. So, what else would I be doing? So it's great.
Yeah. Why does the microbiome fit into functional medicine? And what, just give listeners a definition of functional medicine versus traditional medicine.
Sure, and then I can give a definition more of the microbiome as well, to see how it fits in. So functional medicine is really a system of how a physician thinks about and works with their patient. It's a system that recognizes that virtually all disease starts with our genetic potential and the interaction of the environment with that. And a functional medicine doctor is continuously looking for the root cause of disease. A lot of Western medicine is treating symptoms. And I don't need to go over what's said so often, but, somebody has arthritis, so they go to a doctor and they get a drug which lowers inflammation in their joints, but of course has all kinds of side effects and does nothing to find out why they have arthritis or cure it. So functional medicine attempts through advanced laboratory testing and techniques of evaluating the patient to find out what's the cause. And the cause of arthritis didn't happen last week. It started, maybe 5 years ago or 20 years ago. So that's what we try to uncover.
Okay.
And there's
go ahead. Here's a real laydown, but how important is the microbiome you're seeing to a person's well-being? Well,
this is why I'm back working 7 days a week, because 20, 30 years ago we suspected that the microbiome was important. And throughout history, yogurt's been very important for maintaining good health, and we had lots of inferences about its effect. Well, in the past 4 years, with the development of the next-gen sequencing equipment, looking at DNA and RNA of both cells, human body cells, and then other organism cells, we began to realize that the microbiome is actually the root cause of virtually every chronic disease, whether it's diabetes, autism, depression, Parkinson's, obesity, heart disease, even whether cancer drugs are being effective or not. We now know that is based on the person's microbiome, and that if somebody has a disordered microbiome, that cancer drug actually could be harmful to them. And that's why it's only effective, maybe 20% of the people. So every week, I am constantly amazed. And again, we've been doing this for a long time. Every week, there's some new insight about the incredible importance. Depression. Who knew before the microbiome was the main producer of serotonin, the drug that, the hormone rather, that keeps us happy. And when the microbiome's not producing enough, we get depressed. So did Naveen share with you on the show his story about the microbiome developing in humans? Do you remember?
He told me a funny story about from the microbiome perspective itself, that they envisioned creating this human to be a carrier for them and would protect them. And I think that was a really hilarious story.
Well, even though it was told somewhat tongue-in-cheek, every week the evidence mounts that there's actually a fair amount of truth in that. I know, it's mind-boggling to even think about that, other than the humorous.
How do you feel about yourself as a person, and how is your perspective on you as a person and other people changed by what you've learned? I know it's probably a really difficult question, but what are your thoughts around that? Like, how do you see yourself and other people now differently from what you've learned?
Well, on a personal level, it's just why I'm here on the planet. When I evaluate myself, I look inside. Why am I here? What am I supposed to be doing? How do I contribute? What's my passion? And it's just why I'm here. It's a way to give people information to make choices. And it turns out the area that I've been fortuitously involved a long time ago turns out to be now the one that is revolutionizing healthcare. And if you look out 5 years from now, healthcare, 90% will be involved with the microbiome. I mean,
wow.
Breast cancer, the breast tissues have their own microbiome, and it's disordered in women who get breast cancer. So every place you look.
I've asked a lot of people about the microbiome. We've done a series on it, and everyone always talks about the gut microbiome, and that the gut microbiome lives like your colon, all that stuff. Where in the body are there other colonies of microbiome, of microbes? Are they everywhere in your body? Are they not in certain places? Like, do these colonies interact? Do they have their own territory? Like, what do you see?
So let's start with the planet, okay? So planet Earth has a microbiome. So a microbiome, when we say that word, we're referring to these one-cell little bitty organisms that you might call bacteria, parasites, fungi, viruses, phages. Okay, those what we mean by the microbiome. And they live in the air, the water, and the soil. In the soil, they're what allow plants to grow, the bacteria to grow properly. In the air, they're part of why we can make breads taste so delicious and why you can make beer, the yeast in the air, for example. In the human body or in animals, they live everywhere. They live on our skin. They're now shown to be the key aspect of aging of our skin related to inflammation, both the external microbiome on the skin surface and the internal one. They live in our ears, our nose, our mouth. The oral aspect microbiome is very critical for developing gum diseases and actually for developing heart disease, depending on the microbiome in one's mouth. And then the main activity of the microbiome is in the gut. So as Naneem I mentioned, there are 40 trillion, cells, the microbiome. Our human body, has a few million cells. And the DNA activity, metabolic activity of the microbiome in our gut is, 1,000 of times more powerful than the whole DNA activity, microbiome, metabolic activity of our cells. So it's a bigger organism. It's a more powerful. It produces more chemicals. It produces more metabolic activity than the rest of our body. So they live everywhere, and we're now noticing that they communicate together. And the microbiome in our intestines actually communicate with light. They have little pulse light signals. They communicate back and forth. They can move around as different colonies of different species communicate with each other and talk and say, let's move over here, let's do this over here. It's just a whole separate world, and we just now have the tools to see what's happening. And every scientist is just like shaking their heads. They can't believe what they find.
Yeah, that's crazy. Is there any, this may be a really crazy question. Is there any evidence of a second brain that's an emergent property of all the stuff that goes on in your gut, or is that ridiculous?
Yes. Oh no. A lot of evidence and a lot of discussion about that. It turns out that what we've been thinking about our brain, the organ in top of our head, it looks like maybe up to 80% of what it does is just executing signals coming from the gut microbiome. 20% might be involved in independent, creative thought that we think about.
Really?
But yes, 80% is executing the signals coming up through the vagus nerve. So there's a direct communication from the gut right to the vagus nerve up to the brain. That was discovered, a year ago, I guess. And then all the chemicals, the metabolites that go there, that cross the blood-brain barrier, and then, of course, the hormones like serotonin and things like that. The gut appears to have an independent process of thought. When it gets hungry, it wants us to eat. It actually, if there's certain bacteria there that ones that like sugar a lot, is why people crave sugar. If we have an imbalance of that bacteria, they're telling the brain to eat sugar.
It sounds like we're the president, of the country, and the bacteria are all our constituents, so they have tremendous influence. We still maybe, I guess, run the show, but they have tremendous influence in most of what goes on. Is that accurate?
Well, yes, and again, pushing the envelope, the information that comes out on a weekly basis starts to suggest it's more than that. It's more than just an influence. There's appears to be an independent community that wants to survive on its terms, and that it influences us in ways to help it survive.
So what are some of the influences? You said it can make us crave sugar.
Mm-hmm.
It can
make us crave sugar.
Change our mood.
Oh, absolutely. So our mood depends a lot on a chemical called serotonin. People who are depressed, for example, or unhappy, have low levels of serotonin, and it turns out that the microbiome is responsible for making 80% of the serotonin. And so keeping the microbiome happy, which we're learning about what that means, keep microbiome happy, then it produces more serotonin, and we feel happier.
What about what we eat? I mean, the microbiome, I guess, quote unquote, eats first, and then it produces all kinds of chemicals and things that help us, and it helps digest things. I mean, what percentage of the responsibility for processing the food we eat goes to the microbiome, and what percentage of the benefit goes to it as well?
Sure. So a lot of the processing, which let's call digestion for the moment, occurs through in the stomach and the small intestine through the production of digestive enzymes, hydrochloric acid and pancreatic enzymes and bile enzymes and things like that. So that's what's breaking down the food into chemical constituents. Okay, so the microbiome doesn't appear to care whether it's pear or banana. They're looking for the chemicals that are being broken down that might be uniquely involved in that, or the fibers that they can ferment that might be involved in different foods. So the foods that we eat and don't eat are a primary determinant of both the diversity of the microbiome and the components, the constituents of it. And by diversity, there are about 8,000 different species of bacteria, and we want to have the largest diversity. We want to have the most of those. And if you have a large diversity, that's related to healthy aging over the long term. So,
how much redundancy? It's funny. You would think like, okay, you need as much diversity as possible, and there's thousands of species. But I mean, have people tried to evaluate at a base level how many species are needed to live versus live well? And is there a lot of redundancy? Let's say like there's a certain bacteria that keeps my gut lining intact. Is it just one that does that, or are there 10 different species that do that? How many make serotonin? Are there like 20 different species that do that, or just one? How resilient is the gut to change?
Mm-hmm. Good question, Rich. It appears that is not just one species in any of those things that you mentioned, and it appears that it's the interaction of various species that are the key component. That's why what Viome does when we do a sequencing of everything that's found in the gut, we're looking at the RNA expression. So remember, DNA doesn't do anything by itself; it just expresses through RNA. So we're looking at actually what's happening, what's being expressed by all the different bacteria, viruses, phages, parasites, fungi, etc. And that's what upregulates, for example, an inflammation pathway. So it's a number of things contributing to it. It's not just one. It's the whole community that is out of balance. So it's very complex. We evaluate over 1 million pieces of data for each person through the artificial intelligence engine. So this is a giant big data endeavor, I guess. And so the research that comes out every week is partly a matter of the incredible processing power that we now have to evaluate the data.
What is the is there? I'm reaching for words, but what does the microbiome governance system look like? Are there hierarchies of bacteria? Maybe it's ridiculous, but are there hierarchies of bacteria that control other groups, or are they just kind of all work together in like a community, or what does it look like there?
I think that information is all still in process, and we're learning about that. There are obviously dominant species of bacteria, and we measure down to the strain level because we find the same that particular species of bacteria, the different strains actually have different effects. So in the past, we could only measure down to the species level, and we were ascribing effects to those. And I want to find out that even in the same species, different strains of that actually do different things in the body. So that's
I thought species was the lowest level. Like, what is the strain? Is that like a dialect of a language, or how does a strain differ for same species?
I guess that would be a good layperson description, what you just said.
Okay, so even within what's a I don't know, what would they call a strain of that, for instance? Like, how would you where would that show up? Where would you see that?
It would have another word after it.
So you've seen, all right, so there can be many strains.
So now that we can look at the strain level through the whole shotgun genome sequencing and then look at the metascriptome, that we can see the down to the strain level of what's happening. And again, a year ago, nobody could see it.
Why could no one see it a year ago, and why now? What allowed you guys to be able to see to that level?
The technology of the sequencing, how many reads you could do, and cost basis. I guess it was possible a few years ago, but the cost was so high that nobody did it.
Okay.
So with the sequencing costs coming down, it allows us to do much more in-depth look at what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, I won't say the name, but I've had a couple of companies analyze my gut microbiome, and I've gotten back, I guess, just the genus name, right? Like one said I had Curvibacter, but they didn't give any particular species or strain, and it really didn't tell me anything. Is that information useless because there's so many different strains that do different things?
Well, it's useless in two ways. One, they're using what's called 16S RNA technology, which is probably 4 or 5 years old, and they're just measuring one little piece of it, and so they can only get down to that level. And in addition, they are just measuring the DNA. So the DNA is like just taking a snapshot picture, and you don't know if they're dead or alive, if they're active or inactive. A good example is if you were flying over New York City, 5,000 feet in a plane, and you look down and you said, "Oh, okay, I can see there's maybe 60% women there and 40% men, and there's some old people, some young people, and in New York there's a very, very high crime rate. Therefore, the women must be more criminals than men." So you just can't make, which obviously is not true, but you can't make those inferences when you look at that high level, and that's what all the 16S companies are doing. And it's a matter of cost.
Okay.
So they're using that 5-year-old technology because it's become somewhat inexpensive, I guess.
Okay, so when someone sends a sample into Viome, what are they getting that they're not getting from other companies? Like, what will my report look like, for instance?
They're getting the RNA expression of the DNA of everything that's there, not just the bacteria, but every organism, the bacteria, the viruses, the phages, the fungi, the parasites. If we find 1 in a million in the transcriptome, then we're reporting it. And the reason RNA is so important is because now we can understand what they're doing and not doing. So we know if certain things are being expressed in certain ways, that's turning on an inflammatory pathway, or we know that we're not producing enough, butyric acid, one of the very important short chain fatty acids, or we know if there's RNA shedding from the intestinal cells, we can tell that that's causing a leaky gut. And amazingly, while we don't report this, we can tell what food someone's eating. We can tell if they're smokers. We can tell if they're a drinker. Of alcohol. We can tell what toxic chemicals they've been exposed to, because it all shows up in the microbiome.
That's amazing. It's crazy. So what is your AI doing? What is it trying to determine when it looks at a sample?
So the AI is evaluating which of all these pathways are being upregulated or downregulated, and then associating that with what foods will influence and get them back in the right direction. and what foods could be causing the inflammatory cascade, for example, and therefore should be avoided. And it's going to be different for each person.
So what will a sample report look like? Does it give me? Are you allowed to give recommendations on what to eat or what to avoid, or what comes out of the report? I get my report. What do I do?
So you get your report, and there are 3 or 4 sections. The report, by the way, comes on a iOS or Android app. And when you get it, there's an artificial intelligence chat bot, which will walk you through various aspects of the report. But in the beginning, there are some kind of general indexes: a wellness index, a digestive index, a metabolic index that shows how you compare, diversity index, how you compare in general to the rest of the population. Then there are the details of what's been found, a listing of everything that's active or should be active, and you can drill down if someone wants to, those names and see exactly what they mean and what they do and what they're supposed to be doing. And then from there, it eventually leads you to the whole nutrition and diet section, where the key part of the recommendations in that section, of course, is here's a list of foods that are your superfoods. These are the foods you should eat frequently. Here's a list of foods that you should have moderate amounts of. Here's a list of foods that you should eat infrequently. Here's a list of foods that you should avoid. And from that, you put together a proper nutritional diet, and taking into account, protein, carbs, and fats, et cetera. So just because something's on the superfood list doesn't mean you should eat only those 5 foods, 7 days a week. That would not be healthy. That's I
was going to ask you, experimentally or anecdotally, have you had people get the report and change their diet according to the recommendations, and what happens to them? Have you gotten feedback from people? Have you done it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. We get hundreds of testimonials every day from people with the changes. And the short-term changes, because we're lowering the inflammation cascade for most people who have inflammation turned on, they're going to sleep better, more energy. If they're overweight, they're going to lose weight. So even though this is not a diet for weight loss, people who are overweight lose weight. On the Dr. Oz show 2 weeks ago, a 30-minute show about biome, he had members of his audience from 4 months before do the test. We didn't know he was doing this. Do the test, and they came in on the show as a surprise to us. And 2 of the people around there happened to have been way overweight, obese, and they both lost like 70 pounds. And again, nothing to do with calories. This is not counting calories. That's why most diets don't work. I mean, if diets worked, there wouldn't be a new diet book out every week, right? They don't work because if the same diet works for everybody, there also wouldn't be 50 million diets either, even if they did. Right. Exactly. Huh. So the key is a personalized, healthy diet. Whether it's for athletes.
Can you give me a few case studies, or can you talk about maybe yourself or Naveen or someone like, maybe your own report? Like, did you do this? What did you see? Any particulars in your report? What changes did you make, and what happened to you? What did you experience?
Sure. Or
are you a McDonald's eater and you don't care?
I've always been a very healthy eater. So what's interesting is because people understand this personalized aspect of it for them, they then get inspired to make the changes. And we know that making a change is difficult. Everybody knows you should probably exercise more. Well, that's hard to do because you're changing a habit. So changing people's food habits, there's a whole lot of psychological aspects to that, and cultural aspects to it. It's difficult. So we found that the approach of this personalized aspect to people understand provides a good part of the inspiration. So for me, I'm actually a vegetarian, and so for me there were several vegetables that were on my avoid list. I guess about 4 that I had been eating frequently. And I eliminated those and then modified some other protein sources, not as often as I had been eating them. They were in the moderate list, soy and some other ones. And what I found is, so I've been generally very healthy very active. I exercise actually a couple hours a day, good energy. What I found is as I came actually back to the States and joined Viome, now, I think somebody else would have been pretty exhausted with this new work pace. I found that I had the same energy as I've always had, even though I was now working 7 days a week and 16 hours a day. So that would be the main thing that I noticed, is that I could now I had a lot more depth of energy and probably mental clarity as well.
That's great.
So I didn't end up with any kind of brain fog, even though they're doing a lot. That's people sleep better. There's some athletes whose performance they feel have improved. People have what we call GI concerns. Those flare-ups tend to either get reduced or go away pretty quickly within a few weeks.
How long does it take for people to experience benefits? What's pretty quickly, like a few days or a few weeks?
A few weeks. Some people certainly, in 3 or 4 or 5 days, but on the average, 3 to 4 weeks.
Would you have people that come back and then sample again a few months later? And
yes.
Like, what happens when I change my diet, when I have less of this and more of that, and I eliminate this? And what happens to my microbiome? What am I doing to them? So number one, you're increasing your diversity, and as I mentioned, that's important for two aspects. One, it's important, as I mentioned, in terms of just general health, long-term longevity, and healthy living. We know the diversity is associated with that. Secondly, a more diverse microbiome means it's more stable. So for most people who don't have a lot of diversity here in the United States because of antibiotic use and poor diet, okay, their microbiome is changing all the time. It's not very stable. Little bitty insults to it make dramatic changes. Their health is always shifting. So one thing that the personalized diet does is increases the diversity. So now you have a more stable microbiome over time. Why does it increase the diversity? What is it? Does it kill does it starve certain bacteria to death if I stop having, blackberries? If I start having Brussels sprouts, does it attract other ones? Like, what does it do?
Okay. It's not that we want to necessarily kill off any bacteria, because diversity means more. We want to stop or reduce what they're doing. So we want to get them to play better as part of the community. I guess that's a simple way to play it. We want them to be better players in this very complex community ecosystem. So it's not that we're killing them off. It's just that we're retraining them, if you will, to play a different role. So we want to have as many different kinds as possible.
Do I get new bacteria? Like if I eat a certain, if I start eating seaweed or something, will I actually attract somehow new bacteria into my gut that can digest that seaweed or something new?
Yeah, you'll feed ones that maybe are there in teeny amounts, and you will allow ones that you're being exposed to colonize. So we're being exposed, everywhere. Recent research shows that people who have dogs, for example, have increased diversity because they're getting exposed to more bacteria just by petting their dogs and things like that. People who play in the dirt. Farmers have a more diverse microbiome. So we're allowing the ones that are there in very, very small amounts to start to populate more, and then ones that we take in all kinds of ways, we're allowing them to colonize by the right diet.
Okay. Yeah, I was just wondering because I was wondering why it increases the diversity. So it's diversity you already have. It just changes the number of the different
a profile that is producing more beneficial metabolite and not producing harmful metabolite.
So have you guys identified? I don't know if you're allowed to say it, but have you identified foods that are universally bad for people, or ones that are almost universally good? Or
besides donuts?
Well, no. I mean, seriously, are there any? Are there any statements you can make about things that appear to be almost universally bad or almost universally good?
I don't think so. I mean, we're talking about sugar, but not a food. But certainly sugar would be universally not helpful.
Okay. No, I was just curious if you had seen that. Because you said you could tell if someone's a smoker. So this is my next question. What kind of surprising things have you seen in people's guts? Do some people have bacteria that you've never seen before, or they have very odd mixes of bacteria? Like, what are some of the insights you've gotten from seeing all these profiles?
Well, the surprising thing we just learned, I think 3 or 4 weeks ago, which to my knowledge has not been known before. I could be wrong. And that's that the bacteria can produce estrogen. I don't think anyone had an idea that the bacteria could produce estrogen. We knew it could affect various pathways that estrogen was involved in, but it's actually producing estrogen, and that has not been, I don't believe, known. And this is monumental, staggering, and as people start to research this now, we're able to find out some very interesting implications from it. And therefore, there are probably other ones that they're doing as well that we don't know.
So when someone becomes your customer, what's the process? Do they pay a certain amount and then you send them a kit, they send you their sample, and then you send them back results? Or what's the customer flow? What does it look like?
Customer flow is pretty simple. They purchase a kit, which has a device in it for collecting stool, very simple and easy. It's a very small amount of stool. The prepaid mailer back to the laboratory. They activate their kit online through an iOS or Android app. They get sent back 3 weeks or less later. They're notified that the results are ready, and then they can walk through the results. So a very simple process.
Okay, and again, in the results, you'll tell them, hey, this is what the bacteria and what strains you have. You tell them what kind of phages and viruses and parasites and other stuff they have too, or just bacteria?
Yes, everything.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Everything we find, it's a 1 in a million of the transcriptome.
Do people get scared if they see like they have certain kinds of parasites or viruses in them, and should they be worried? Or what kind of insights have you gotten from not just the bacteria, but the other creatures that are in there?
I don't know that people get scared. Now we're a wellness company, so we're not treating any particular diseases. So someone sees those, we tell them a little bit about them, and then they can if they choose to, then talk to their healthcare provider and ask them for further advice or information on it.
Okay, all right. What any implications that you guys have seen of having various viruses or parasites or phages in your gut biome?
From our perspective, they're intimate parts of the community. So again, just in the past few years, the understandings have been that what we thought of the gut microbiome and traditionally thought of them as, if you go back a while, when gastroenterologists or physicians thought about the microbiome or the bacteria or parasites in our gut, they thought of them as things that just kind of created dysentery and diarrhea and stuff like that, and people just weren't thinking of this healthy, complex community. And the same with viruses and stuff. So now we find out that viruses play a role, and phages play a role in what's happening in terms of our health and in the proper functioning of this very dynamic community. So they're all members, and they're all doing their roles. There's less understood about those at the moment than bacteria. But again, every week we learn more things about what they're doing, what their role is, and it appears that most of their role is beneficial.
What kind of things do you hope to learn over the next few years about the microbiome? Are there specific questions that you want answered?
What I would like to learn, and I think we will learn, is, and again, this is not what Viome does at the moment, but how we truly can keep and manipulate people to have a healthy microbiome, and therefore lower dramatically / eliminate their risk of chronic disease. So, that's what I believe is possible, and I would love to be around and be part of seeing that actually happening. And we're talking about around the world. I mean, we want to make this as affordable as possible. So this is not just for first world countries and the United States and Europe and what have you. This is important for everybody around the world. So we want to be part of getting the cost down where where cost is not a factor, and people anywhere in the world having information to make these choices, and of course then having the ability to have access to the proper foods and clean water and stuff like that.
And we haven't mentioned, there's a couple more questions. We haven't talked about probiotics. Do you feel like it's better to just change what you eat to affect your microbiome, or do you think probiotics can help, or they're not really useful? Or
I think probiotics can have a role. I think prebiotics are even more important than probiotics, as probiotics are the foods for probiotics. So I think that's the first line of change. Probiotics can be important in terms of short-term use to affect some kind of change. The truth is, at this point, most of them don't colonize, number one. And number two, go to a health food store and look at the probiotics on the shelf, and there's 50 different ones. They all have different combination of probiotics in them. What should anybody take? We identify and we can recommend sometimes some very specific ones that would be beneficial to someone to take on a short-term basis. But at the moment, there is no good way of identifying, a quote formula that someone should be taking. There are companies that do that, but they're just quote making it up from a scientific point of view.
Yeah, I don't know. This is a crazy idea. Would there be a way to get a sample of someone's gut bacteria and then culture a sample from their existing bacteria that has better ratios, and then give that to them as a probiotic? It's like a truly customized one that has their ideal mix that they would take.
Possibly, if you know about FMT, fecal microbial transplant, so that's where they're using a stool sample from somebody else, a healthy donor, and transplanting it into, at this point, someone who has a very life-threatening condition called C. difficile infection. That's a bacteria which often leads to death in older people or immunocompromised people. So, and antibiotic regimes are not very effective against it. And it appears the only thing that's really effective is this FMT, fecal microbial transplant. That's become very popular. It actually started in China 800 years ago. It was yellow soup, it was called. People drank it. And actually now they don't have to even do the transplant rectally. They have frozen capsules that you can take, which are just as effective as the rectal implant. This is done under physician supervision, and at the moment, in terms of the FDA, they're allowing it for the C. difficile infection to the public, but there's a lot of research going on with it in terms of all the other gastrointestinal diseases such as bowel syndrome and ulcerative colitis and even autism and things like that. But if you extend that this procedure to kind of what you're talking about, yes, it's certainly possible, and we will see that. There are drug companies who, all the major drug companies are investing hundreds of millions of dollars into research into the microbiome and genetically, because their take is, okay, let's genetically engineer, bacteria or precursors and stuff like that. That's one approach.
Right.
The other approach is identifying the metabolites that are missing or low production, and either give them like butyric acid or something, or try to manipulate the bacteria, which we're doing through food, to produce more of those missing or low metabolites.
Okay.
So many approaches, many companies are have been funded. There are a few public, 3 or 4 public companies that are all looking at ways to develop therapeutic interventions from somehow manipulating the microbiome.
Okay.
Or these are for specific diseases. So what Viome has done, of course, is we're not focusing on a specific disease. We're functioning on wellness, which includes many things.
Well, all right, this is my last question. I know I've questioned you to death, but any recommendations when someone gets sick and they have to take antibiotics, which I've heard ravages your microbiome? Any recommendations on what they could do food-wise or supplement-wise to help mitigate the damage that antibiotics does?
Sure. And by the way, the the recent research shows that it actually causes a disorder. When you take antibiotics, it has a 3 to 5 year effect in disordering the microbiome. So it's not just a month effect. It actually disorders. It takes that long for the microbiome to start to recover if someone doesn't do anything specifically about it. So prebiotics, probiotics, both in terms of supplements that are available, and then people can just Google prebiotic foods, and you'll get a list of like the 10 foods that contain inulin and other fibers that are good prebiotics. Onions, garlic, leeks, Jerusalem artichoke, flaxseed, a couple of ones off the top of my head. But there's a good 10 or 12 foods that are excellent prebiotics, along with prebiotic formulas that they can buy from the supplement industry. So take those. Also, of course, people might consider any kind of antifungal agents, because that's one of the first things to start to overcolonize after antibiotic use, or yeast, or the growth of yeast, and then some kind of broad spectrum probiotic.
Okay, very good.
That's what I would do.
Okay, no, that's helpful. All right, so how do people get in contact with Viome? Either to ask questions or become a customer, or to talk about possible business ventures.
Viome.com. People who want to talk about business ventures, Viome.com/business partners. People who want to become involved as ambassadors and help spread the word, Viome.com/partners. And there's a customer service line, which I don't know the phone number to, also to call and talk to people.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I know I asked you 8 million questions, but you get a lot of knowledge, and I appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Oh, sure. Future Tech, right? Podcast. And I'm talking in Qatar next week at the Future is Now conference, and that's what it is. The future is now. It's not 3 or 5 or 10 years from now. We got self-driving cars, and we got the microbiome and health, and artificial intelligence engines, and it's all happening now. It's just so exciting to be alive.
Very good. Very good. Coming to Dallas, Texas, September 14th, 15th, and 16th, 2018, the Blockchain and Future Tech Expo. This is going to be a gigantic conference of over 5,000 people. We're going to be talking about blockchain and its applications. We're going to be talking about quantum computing, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, and several other future technologies that are poised to and actually changing our lives as we speak. Here's why you should attend. As you may know, early adopters are the ones that investigated and profited from things like the gold rush in the 1800s, from the dot-com boom in the 1990s, from the internet boom in 2005, from the smartphone explosion in 2007, from the real estate boom that ended in 2008, and of course, from the Bitcoin boom that started in 2012. Early adopters act now. They don't wait till later. They go out west first. In their covered wagons, they find the biggest gold nuggets. If you consider yourself an early adopter and you want to find the biggest nuggets, then you owe it to yourself to attend this upcoming conference. Blockchain is going to affect how we control and store our medical data, how we send money around the world, how we bank, and more. But artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and cybersecurity will play a pivotal role in our lives as well. And that's why our next event, September 14th to the 16th at the Dallas Convention Center, is going to have not only 5,000 plus attendees, but will showcase blockchain, AI, cybersecurity, quantum computing, and more. You want to get in on the coming gold rush of future tech and opportunity as an early adopter. Don't be left out. To register, go to bftexpo.com. That's blockchainfuturetechexpo.com. Thank you. You have been listening to Almost Here, Around the Corner Future Technology Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Subscribe to this podcast, post a review to discover more future technologies that are poised to transform our lives for better or worse, such as Bitcoin, artificial intelligence, 3D printing, blockchain, virtual reality, and more.